What happens when one of America's most notorious serial killers gets caught?
The defendant is a serial killer who was basically hiding in plain sight.
This is Lonnie Franklin, who's on trial for multiple murders in Los Angeles, California. In 1984, Franklin started a crime spree that would last over 2 decades, where he assaulted and killed 10 women, one of them a 15-year-old. Most of the victims were chronic drug users and street workers, whose bodies were later dumped in the trash. Franklin went dormant from 1988 to 2002, earning him the nickname the Grim Sleeper. The cases went unsolved until 2010, when Franklin was arrested after his DNA was collected by an undercover officer who pretended to be a waiter at a restaurant he frequented.
He made an arrest of the suspect that has been known to many as the Grim Sleeper.
At his trial, the prosecution labeled Franklin as a predator.
It should be obvious. The defendant is a predator. Over and over and over and over and over and over again. None of them deserve to be brutally murdered and dumped like trash.
The prosecution also clashed with the defense over stall tactics and delays in DNA testing. The defense, however, argued that DNA was incorrectly seized and therefore could not be used as evidence. But Judge Kathleen Kennedy decided to allow it.
Eating food at a restaurant and having your items cleared from the table, that's really out there, Mr. Dempster. So I'm going to find that once those items were put into the trash or taken from the table, he no longer had a Fourth Amendment interest in those items anymore.
After a trial that lasted over 3 months, the jurors reached a verdict in just 2 days.
Guilty of the crime of first-degree murder.
Before declaring his fate, Judge Kennedy had a few words for the serial killer.
Why did all of this happen? Why did you do all of these things? All of these women were defenseless. They were not a threat to you in any way, shape, or form. After thinking about it, pondering it, going over it in my mind, I've come to this conclusion, that it doesn't matter why. I can't think of anyone that I've encountered in all my many years in the criminal justice system that has committed the kind of monstrous and the number of monstrous crimes that you have. And so, Lonnie Franklin Jr., for the first-degree murder of Deborah Jackson, as alleged in count 1, in the special circumstance of multiple murder, it is the judgment and sentence of this court that you shall suffer the death penalty.
Ultimately, Lonnie Franklin was given the death penalty for his crimes that terrorized the city of Los Angeles. This is 30-year-old Wade Wilson.
He pulled her out of the car and realized that she was still breathing. Then he got back in the car and ran her over until she looked like spaghetti.
Who is on trial for double murder in Cape Coral, Florida. In October 2019, the man with the striking face tattoos went on a crime spree where he first choked to death 35-year-old Christine Melton at a friend's house. Wilson then stole Melton's car, visited his ex-girlfriend Melissa Montanez, and attacked her.
Describe what you mean when you say he was beating you.
It all went so fast and so slow, whether it be punches, slapping, choking, that kind of nature. Yes.
Police were called to the scene, who confronted a shirtless Wilson.
How you doing? What's going on, man? You're waiting on your girlfriend? Oh, okay. That's no problem.
But Wilson managed to give them a slip.
Don't go anywhere. Hey.
As he drove away, Wilson met 43-year-old Diane Ruiz and stopped her to ask for directions. As the unsuspecting Ruiz got in, Wilson and then repeatedly with the car.
What we know is that Miss Ruiz had been strangled, and what we also know is that she died as a result of blunt force trauma because of the multiple rib fractures.
Wilson then called his father Stephen Testaseca and confessed.
He just told me, he did something. There was 2 people gone that would not be back. He said, I'm a killer.
Testaseca gave police his son's location, and Wilson was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, grand theft, and battery.
Mr. Wilson, you're charged with first-degree murder, grand theft auto, battery.
At trial, Testaseca testified against his killer's son.
He just said he met a girl at a bar. They went back to her house, hung out for a little bit, and then she fell asleep. He said he got on top of her and choked her. He said, I choked that. He left her there and took her car.
What did he say about the second girl?
He said he saw her walking down the street and stopped and asked her for directions, and she got in the car with him. He said he reached over and choked her. He pulled her out of the car and realized that she was still breathing. Then he got back in the car and ran her over until she looked like spaghetti.
Testiseka said Wilson was proud of his actions and showed no remorse during the confession.
He was excited. I felt like he was wanting me to feel the way he felt about it.
Did he seem proud of it?
Yes.
Did he seem to show any kind of remorse?
Oh, man.
Wilson was largely emotionless during the trial, and eventually the jury found him guilty on all charges and recommended the death penalty.
We, the jury, find that Wade Wilson should be sentenced to death.
Ultimately, it was for the judge to decide whether the serial strangler would get life behind bars or die for his crimes.
The totality of the circumstances warrants that the defendant, Wade Stephen Wilson, be sentenced to death for each count of first-degree murder.
Wade Wilson didn't even blink an eye after being slapped with a death sentence of Martez Abram, who's facing double murder charges in South Haven, Mississippi. In July 2019, Abram was suspended from his workplace at Walmart after he allegedly brandished a knife at another employee. A few days later, the 39-year-old returned to the store, this time with a gun, and shot two of his co-workers.
By the time I was walking out, you just see people running past me, and I was, I'm just thinking, you just hear gunshots. Pop, 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 pop.
Anthony Brown, 40, and Brandon Gales, 38, both managers at Walmart, tragically died at the scene. When police arrived, they caught Abram fleeing the store.
Two of our officers encountered the suspect outside on the west side parking lot of the building. One of our officers was shot at this time.
The shooter was also injured when officers returned fire and appeared for his court hearing from the hospital bed. At his trial, prosecution and defense attorneys clashed about whether Abram had planned the attack days in advance.
Planned for 3 days. He arrived at the Walmart July 30th at 6:28 a.m. The evidence showed at that time the victim executed Anthony Brown in the parking with one shot. He killed him in the parking lot, and they went inside. He hunted down the people for games.
This incident did not start 3 days early. You will hear about a person that is wedded to that job, that became embedded in that job, that became his life.
Then an eyewitness took the stand and recounted the events of the attack.
He was laying on the ground with his eyes open.
The injured cop, too, appeared in court and gave testimony.
I got out of my vehicle. Once I got out of my vehicle, I heard gunshots, and I felt the pressure of the bullet hit my back, and I blacked out for like 2 seconds because I thought I was dead, but I realized I had been shot.
Later, when it was time for the defendant's testimony, Abram was forced to watch a video of his attack.
That's you, isn't it?
Yes.
Look at it, please, sir.
Yes.
All right, proceed. Stop. Mr. Gale is on the floor going down to this point, isn't he?
Yes.
Okay, and that's you shooting him, right?
Yes.
Okay, proceed. Stop it. Look at the screen, sir.
Yes.
That's you shooting him?
Yes.
And you admit that you shot him in cold blood?
Yes.
Proceed. And then stop. You shot him again, didn't you?
Yes.
While he's on the floor. Yes?
The killer broke down several times and confessed to his crimes.
There. 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 You shot him again, didn't you?
Yes.
All right, proceed. Now, after that, you went back to the toilet paper office.
After some deliberation, the jury came to an unsurprising verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Martez Abram, guilty of capital murder in count 1.
At his sentencing, family members of the victims addressed their loved one's killer.
I feel the consequences of your actions on July the 30th, 2019 should cost you your life on this earth. But they do not have to cost you your eternity. God will forgive you of your sins, and He is the only one that can save your soul.
We are a Christian family. And Mr. Martez, God requires us to forgive you for what you did. It didn't happen overnight. Forgiveness didn't come that easily. But with prayer, over time, we were able to forgive you for what you done.
Ultimately, it was time for Abram to learn his fate, which was the death penalty.
In count 1, I will sentence you to death. Count 2 will be sentenced to death.
Martez Abram couldn't face the horrors he was responsible for. But what happens when a convict spits on the jury? Like in the case of 27-year-old Neil Simpson, who's on trial for robbery and murder in Elyria, Ohio. In June 2007, Simpson entered Granny D's Pizza with a gun and allegedly shot the owner, Dave Kowalczyk, during an attempted robbery. One of the employees called 911.
911, Kidney, please fire ambulance.
Someone just shot someone.
Are you with the person?
Yeah.
Are they breathing?
I don't know where we're going because I want to get shot.
Simpson was arrested and charged with aggravated murder. After both sides rested their case, Simpson was convicted on all charges. However, Simpson shocked everyone by spitting on jurors as he was being led to the stands to make a statement. At his sentencing, Simpson had his head wrapped in mosquito netting and a plastic diaper to prevent any further spitting incidents. Before the judge delivered his verdict, the victim's siblings addressed their brother's killer.
My brother was a loving, kind person. He did anything in the world for anybody.
For one family, they get to see a son, a grandson, a brother in prison. The other family, we get to visit a brother, brother-in-law, uncle, and friend in the cemetery.
Then, it was the prosecutor who had some damning words for the defendant.
Because the heart, Your Honor, is nothing more than a coward. Somebody that covered his face and walked in and shot a defenseless man at close range. That's the true Neil Simpson. The bravado he shows in court, spitting on jurors. I've really never had the misfortune of meeting more foul piece of humanity at this point.
Simpson maintained his innocence.
I didn't kill anyone. I'm not spending the rest of my life in prison for something I didn't do. I know in their heart they think I killed their family member. I'm sorry for your loss, but I had nothing to do with your family member's death.
Facing life in prison, Simpson had a rather extreme fate in mind.
Life without parole don't sit well with me. So I want to request the death penalty. I have two ways I prefer to be murdered. One is to be crucified from the courthouse for all the sins, all the time throughout the world. And the other way would be stoned to death by the victim's family, if that make them feel better.
However, the judge handed over a more standard punishment.
By the state of Ohio, on count 2, life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Ultimately, Simpson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Major freak out during interrogation.
Put this right down here, man. Here. Let's not look at your hand right now, okay? Let's not look at your hand. Tyrone.
Like in the case of Tyrone Johnson, who's on trial for double murder in Tampa, Florida. On October 2018, police arrested Johnson after he allegedly shot and killed his live-in girlfriend, Stephanie Willis, and her 10-year-old son, Ricky. While being brought in for questioning, Johnson appeared to be hysterical and started to hyperventilate.
Right in front. Yeah, just have to have a seat, man. Go ahead and have a seat. Let's not look at your hand right now, okay? Let's not look at your hand. Tyrone, listen to me. Listen to me. Deep breaths, okay? Deep breaths.
After detectives calmed him down, Johnson said he got into an argument with Stephanie that night over what to watch on TV.
You changed the TV? Okay.
The fight escalated and got personal when Stephanie blamed Johnson for his son's recent suicide.
I see my son killed himself because you were, and I called him back and I said, come and get me.
Johnson claimed he felt under attack and started to shoot uncontrollably, first killing Stephanie and then turning the gun towards Ricky when he came to his mother's rescue.
Did you say you hurt my mom? Is that what he said? Did you hit her? I think so. Okay.
At trial, the prosecution argued that Johnson's actions were deliberate and premeditated. They claimed the defendant hunted down the child who was hiding under his bed.
We have shell casings, we have blood, we have holes in the wall in the little boy's room.
The jury saw the same and eventually convicted Johnson of capital murder. Facing the death penalty, Johnson pleaded for mercy at his sentencing.
I am truly remorseful and deeply sorry. The state, knowing nothing about me, would have me believe that before you was a vicious man who went hunting for human lives.
But the judge was having none of it.
Suffice it to say that a precious child is dead. This murder was heinous, atrocious, and cruel. For those acts, I sentence you to death.
Ultimately, Johnson was sentenced to death. He now lives on Florida's death row. Like in the case of 30-year-old Joseph McAlpin, who's on trial for double murder in Cleveland, Ohio. On the night of April 14th, 2017, McAlpin and two others arrived at Mr. Carr's with the intent to rob the dealership. McAlpin then shot and killed the owners Michael Kuznick and Trina Tamola, along with their family dog Axel. Their bodies were found by the couple's 19-year-old son, who called 911. Just a few weeks earlier, Tamola gave an interview concerning a break-in at the dealership that eerily foreshadowed her fate.
We have a huge problem in this city. A huge problem. Everybody on the street will tell you the same thing. All the business owners will tell you that they just don't bother anymore. Because it almost feels pointless.
But will you call police?
Probably not. What would be the point? Unless someone's shooting at me, then I would, maybe that.
Police found McAlpin's DNA at the crime scene and charged him with aggravated murder, burglary, and cruelty to animals. McAlpin pleaded not guilty and represented himself at trial, where his co-defendant, Andrew Keener, who had already pleaded guilty, confronted him.
If you was mad enough to go in there and rob and kill that family, why are you not mad enough to tell everybody in this courtroom what you did?
The deceased couple's son also testified, describing the horrific scene McAlpin had left behind.
Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. The door was propped open for the showroom, and when I looked in, I noticed that pictures were crooked, chairs were on their sides, the candy machine was falling over and broken. And as I was observing the room, I looked behind the desk and I saw a body of what believed to be my mom laying there behind the desk.
The trial lasted over 3 weeks, and after 2 days of deliberation, the jurors reached a unanimous verdict.
We therefore unanimously find that the sentence of death should be imposed on defendant Joseph McAlpin.
Facing the death penalty, McAlpin maintained his innocence at sentencing.
I'm not standing up here to say, hey, you found me guilty. I didn't mean to do it, please. I still stand firm on my innocence. I'm not here to beg for my life. I'm not here to minimize anything that have taken place.
He even showed emotion and broke down when a family member took the stand.
He had a hard life growing up. He's seen a lot of things he shouldn't have seen as a child.
However, the prosecution was having none of it.
He is a demonic killer. A demonic killer. It's one thing to rob somebody, but it's another thing to do what he did. Him and his cohorts, what they are predators. They prey upon our communities, upon our businesses, upon our citizens, and as we try to stabilize and rebuild our neighborhoods and our city.
Eventually, it was time for McAlpin to learn his fate.
Count number 1, the aggravated murder of Trina Tamola Kuznick. The court's going to impose a sentence of death plus 3 years on the firearm specification. Count number 2 for the aggravated murder of Michael Kuznick, death.
Joseph McAlpin currently lives on Ohio's death row for murdering a couple and their dog. Like in the case of Joseph Zieler, a double murder suspect in Cape Coral, Florida. Back in May 1990, 11-year-old Robin Cornell and her babysitter Lisa Story were found assaulted and murdered at their home. The gruesome scene was discovered by Robin's mom, Jan Cornell, who called 911.
Dan, please just calm down. Oh my God!
The case went cold for over 2 decades, until Zieler was arrested in 2016 for shooting and injuring his son. His DNA was collected and entered into the database, which matched the DNA evidence from the 1990 crime scene. Zieler was further charged with capital murder. In court, the prosecution sought the death penalty.
The kind of factors what the defendant did to Robin Cornell and Lisa Story, so grave, so serious, that death is the appropriate recommendation, that death is the appropriate sentence.
Zieler also testified at his trial, where he initially denied knowing both the victims and Jan.
Do you know Jan Cornell?
No, I don't know Jan Cornell.
Do you know Lisa Story?
No.
Do you know Robin Cornell?
No.
But later, Zieler said his DNA was at the crime scene because he and the victim's mother, Jan, were involved in intimate acts the night before the murders.
I slept with Jan Cornell and Leanne Deller, and they were just too much of a pig not to wash their sheets.
He even called the mother a pig.
Your DNA would have still been there 5 months later.
Yes.
And that's because they're pigs and they don't wash their sheets,
exactly.
Right?
Zieler then claimed that the prosecution was framing him.
They took the sheet, recut another sample, and had another analyst do the same test. Did you hear that?
Yes.
So the retesting was done.
I believe FDLE is siding with the prosecution. Of course they're going to say that.
Okay.
Eventually, the jury found Zieler guilty of first-degree murder.
We, the jury, find as follows as to count 1 of the charge. The defendant is guilty of first-degree murder of Robin Cornell. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 2 of the charge. The defendant is guilty of first-degree murder of Lisa Story.
But what Zieler did next left the whole courtroom stunned. At his sentencing, Zieler appeared in handcuffs. First, he asked his attorney for a private discussion.
What's that?
As the attorney leaned in, Zieler threw a cheap shot with his elbow. Thankfully, detectives quickly subdued him. Meanwhile, the lawyer saw the funny side of the incident.
I used to box. I've taken a lot better shots than that.
After the dust settled, it was time for Zieler to learn his fate.
This review of other capital cases has led the court to conclude that the death penalty would be a proportionate sentence in this case. The defendant has forfeited his right to live. Accordingly, it is ordered and adjudged that the defendant, Joseph Adam Zieler, is hereby sentenced to death for the murder of Robin Cornell and the murder of Lisa Story.
Ultimately, Zieler was given the death penalty for the murders of Robin Cornell and Lisa Story.